Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Alex and this is The Car Creative, and in this episode we are going to be doing a little bit of a review of the Canon R5. How I got this so quick, I have no idea, but I'm super excited about it. And of course we are going to be shooting with my favorite lens, the Sigma 35mm art lens. And as you can see behind me, we have been provided a beautiful car by Porsche Center Calgary. We've got a 2017 Mercedes-Benz AMG GTS. And it's crazy. Now, there are tons of videos on the internet reviewing the Canon R5, tons of specs, all the details about it, but what I would like to do is kind of walk you guys through how I would use a Canon R5 on a daily basis as an automotive photographer and videographer. I come from a Sony a7 III, which I also love that camera and has been super faithful to me. Love the image that you get out of it. So the switch over to the Canon R5 and R6 bodies is actually a really big difference. And I'm gonna walk you through some of the differences that you get, some of the pros, some of the cons. We're gonna walk around and take some photos of the car. And as well, I'm gonna drop some of the raw images from this down below so you guys can go edit them. Take a look at the R5. If you're interested in the raw images from this camera, go download them from the link below. And as well, after we take photos, I'm gonna dance around the car doing some video work because I'm super interested in the video capabilities of the R5 as well. And you guys can watch and see the quality. Of course, YouTube will compress it a little bit, but at least you guys can see how it works. And I'll talk you through afterwards how the process went, what I liked, what I didn't like, the image quality, etc. So let's go. One of the biggest drawing factors to the Canon R5 is the ability to shoot 8K raw video, as well as, for me personally, what got me back into Canon is having the 10-bit color. So when I was using the Sony a7 III, no diss to that camera because it's awesome, but it really only shoots in 8-bit color, even if you're shooting in 4K. So coming over to the R5, I'm really curious to see how the 10-bit color turns out in post, as well as having that full 4K at 120 frames per second, 60 frames per second. I think that's just priceless. So I'm really curious to see. This is my first go at actually shooting video with a car. My first impressions though is that the autofocus is killer. I love the tap feature on this thing. You can actually just tap anywhere and it'll pull focus and stay focused. So I'll give you guys a bit of a review after this. So for this particular set of B-roll, my SD card is actually not quite fast enough. I haven't been able to pick up the fast enough cards to be able to shoot in 60 frames per second all eye. So what you're gonna be seeing is essentially 4K, 60 frames per second with IPB. Now that can go up to all eye, which is a lot less compressed, but I'll be curious to see if once we put this on YouTube, if we can actually see the difference between compressed, all eye, or IPB. So let's shoot some B-roll and see how it goes. You can tap on the screen with the a7 III to set where you want to focus, but it doesn't track as well. With this, I'm able to actually tap on the steering wheel. It's locking focus on that the whole way through this pan shot. I don't really know about you guys, but I'm having a really hard time believing that I'm driving this thing. It's been a lot of hard work to get here. This is just a crazy, crazy day. Let's hear the exhaust, because it would be a shame not to do that. Obviously, like, we got it. Out here this morning catching some beautiful sunrise shots with the AMG GTS. That doesn't get old. Last drive before we bring the Mercedes-Benz AMG GTS back to Porsche Center Calgary. So grateful for them, obviously, for letting me take this car out. It is for sale, unless they haven't sold it already, which is very possible. But until then, just enjoy it a little bit. Oh, that's a freaking good time. So what are my thoughts on the first time using the Canon R5? Well, it actually makes me really excited about cameras again. Not to say that the Sony a7 III is not an amazing camera, but it was just a really exciting experience to learn that you can touch the screen, you can pinch and zoom on your images right here. The menus are so much more intelligent than the Sony ones. Like, their Sony menus are a mess. So the Canon just brings you back to a nice, clean, easy menu to use. Getting to know this camera again, I ran into a few issues with like the metering mode, for example. But first, let me tell you about my photo experience, both with importing and how I handled the photos in Lightroom. Then I'll tell you a little bit about my video experience, and then we'll talk about a little bit how I think it compares to the Sony a7 III. So when it comes to photos and editing these, the file sizes are massive. You're getting 48 megabit photos, which is just, it's crazy. These things are huge. The computer that I have is pretty beefy. It's a 2018 iMac that's been spec'd out with all the processors and things that you can get. It handles them okay, but you can tell when you're getting into detail work that it takes a lot. Another thing to note is with the Apple computers, you can't actually preview the files in Finder. You have to import them into Lightroom to even see which photos that you are looking at on the card. So that's an update that Apple needs to make so that it can actually read the files still. In some of the first photos, I was really struggling with the metering mode. The camera was telling me to expose lower and lower and lower to maintain the highlights, but when I bring them in, the shadows are quite low. And bringing those shadows back, I was starting to see some noise. So in some of the photos you guys can edit down below, you can start to see where the noise is introduced in the shadows and how I had to compensate for the highlights. Later on, when I was doing the sunrise shoot, obviously the light is a lot more pleasant there. It's a lot more balanced. I was able to pull detail back without really any noise. As well, with the Sigma 35mm, I was noticing a ton of vignetting. So if you guys are going to be editing these, make sure to correct the lens profile in Lightroom. It'll make a huge difference. That was something that I was noticing I didn't particularly like too much in the images. But when you're taking photos with this, the user experience is amazing. Being able to literally tap on any part of the frame and it will literally track as you move your camera is incredible. The eye autofocus is insane. So good, so fast. I've had zero issues with that. I'm really enjoying using the camera. And when you get a well exposed photo, obviously the details are insanely sharp. We're working with like a 50 megapixel camera here. It's just insane. My main use case is posting these to Instagram, which is a bit of overkill. I don't know if I might use the R6 a little bit more in terms of posting to Instagram, but having that amount of detail is just incredible. So let's get into the video usability. Right out the gate, I am absolutely blown away. The dynamic range, I have had zero issues with being able to expose for highlights and lowlights. Having the 10-bit color and being able to edit is just beautiful. I am noticing a lot of blue hints in the auto white balance. It just kind of naturally goes that way, so I'm just saturating a little bit of the blues. Even though I've got a blue car, I just find it sits in the shadows a lot, so be aware of that. Shooting 4K IPB files, that's about the smallest, most compressed version of 4K that you can shoot. And again, I have a really beefy computer and it really struggles to play back the footage. So I did have to create proxies for pretty much everything. Once I created those proxy files, I was able to edit them, color grade them, and then switch back to original media for the export. So that was a little bit of a pain in the butt. If you guys are looking to edit this footage, just be aware you gotta add a little bit of time to create the proxies so that your workflow can be a lot faster. But color grading it is amazing. The image looks so good, bringing right back to Canon. It's just so easy to color grade, and there's so much detail in there that you guys can work with. The image stabilization is awesome. You have 3 levels, which is off, medium, and then super image stabilized. And if this lens has 0 image stabilization in it, so being able to pick, if I wanted to shoot handheld, I could just punch super image stabilization and just do some crazy handheld stuff. I was pretty impressed. The handheld stuff that I did in this video, that was on the middle level. I could have even gone one step farther with kind of like the super steady stuff. And all of the R6 footage that you guys were watching, that was shot from my wife, who is not really a camera savvy person at all, but being able to trust that the R6 autofocus was going to catch my eye and that the image stabilization in the camera, a lot of that footage was usable. I mean, it's a bit shaky, but again, she's not a videographer. She's just a great woman who was just hand-holding a camera, and she did pretty darn good. I'm pretty impressed by the capability of the R6 and obviously the R5 to be able to handle that steady footage. When it comes to video footage, I'm not seeing any issues when it comes to noise. We were shooting up on the rooftop. The light was pretty limited, and you can see in this video that we didn't really struggle for light too much at all. Again, I'm shooting on the Sigma 35 with a 1.4 aperture, which helps a lot. I didn't really have to crank the ISO too much. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering if I've had any overheating issues, and I have not. Of course, I'm shooting on 4K IPB, which isn't really the processing stuff that it struggles with. So I do officially have the CF Express card, so I will be able to do a little bit more testing of the higher frame rates, maybe even 8K. Let me know if you guys want to see some of that down below, and maybe I can make a video specific on that stuff and my experience with it. So how does it compare to the Sony a7 III, which is the previous camera that I owned? Well, to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed with the low light and highlight retention from the Canon R5 compared to the Sony a7 III. Of course, maybe it takes a little bit for me to get to know this camera a little bit better, but I knew with the Sony a7 III that if I had a balanced image in camera, I'd be able to retain those highlights and bring back the shadows. And very rarely would I see any noise in the a7 III photos, whereas I'm already starting to see noise in the shadows, and it's a little bit harder to retain the highlights is what I'm noticing. Of course, I still need to get to know this camera, maybe sort of the metering modes a little bit, but we will get there. Interface on the Canon R5, way nicer compared to the Sony a7 III. If you've ever used those, you know the menus are crazy. I haven't been able to find picture profiles on the Canon R5. I think it just uses Canon log, which in my opinion is completely good enough. And I did find with the Sonys that I really only stuck with one picture profile anyways, which I'm really hoping to actually do a video on for you guys before I kind of sell those cameras, is to tell you my hybrid settings and the way I would set up my custom modes. Of course, compared to the a7 III, I get a flip out screen, which is really handy when you're doing those really low shots. You can just flip that screen up and still have a really good idea of what you're shooting. And one small thing that I really like about the R5 is when you take off the lens, there's actually a cover over the sensor inside the camera, so you don't have to be super careful when you're swapping your lenses out. So both the R5 and the R6 have that compared to the a7 III. Your sensor is just out there in the open getting dusty. So that's something I really appreciate about these things. And there you go, guys. I really hope that you have found this entertaining. Maybe you learned a little bit of something about the Canon R5, and that's how I personally will be using these cameras, is just shooting some cool B-roll, taking some great photos, and I'm really excited to see how this performs in the long term and how maybe it compares with its little brother, the R6, which we're filming with right now. But if you guys have any questions on these cameras, please let me know in the comments down below. If you did find this entertaining, informational, educational, whatever, please smash that like button for me as well, and consider subscribing to the channel if you like more content like this. We focus on car stuff and cameras, and we're just having a good time hanging out. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I do hope to see you in the next one. Peace.